when I look at culture within a company, the most important thing for me that a company can do to help people on that journey of having a growth mindset is create an environment where there's psychological safety. And in the book, I go into a lot of detail on this because psychological safety, as you know, is absolutely critical. Seems like a hot topic nowadays with most leaders that I speak to. But when you have psychological safety, you have an environment where people can speak up, where they're not afraid to fail, where they do want to participate, where they do want to take risk. And all those things lead to good outcomes. So it leads to innovation, but it also leads to higher employee engagement, better satisfaction, so on and so forth, which are all good things to have. The question is, how do you create psychological safety in a company?
Hi everyone, welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Dan Strode, who's the Global Director of Culture and Strategy at Santander. He's also the author of The Culture Advantage, Empowering Your People to Drive Innovation. During the episode, Dan shares 8 principles to create a culture of innovation in your company. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Welcome to the show, Dan. How are you?
Good, Chris, and you? Everything good?
Not too bad. Nice to see you again. I think last time we spoke, you were like, oh, the book's coming up to launch. You're a bit nervous. Everything was crazy. Now it's out. How does it feel?
Yeah, that's right. It was a testing time, I would say. You have that like last minute nerves. Have I made any spelling mistakes, or are there any corrections to make? And then it comes out. And well, in a way, it's kind of underwhelming because then it's out there and you have to wait. You have to wait for people to buy it. You have to wait for people to read it. You have to wait for the questions that they might have. But no, really happy. There's been some good traction, some good feedback already. So everything well.
Amazing. So for everyone who obviously listening, the book's called The Culture Advantage, Empowering Your People to Drive Innovation. What was the inspiration behind the book in the first place?
Yeah, for me, I've been a culture practitioner for 5 years, in a big bank, Santander. And the interesting thing for me has been, okay, in that 5-year journey, I've seen companies understand culture and really get to know why culture is important. So there's been that baseline within many companies. And I think now is the time where you can take that strong base and elevate it even further. And innovation is one of the key challenges for companies around the world. So I had the good fortune of spending time with some of the greatest companies, getting to know them, really understanding what makes them tick. And it became really, really clear that there were 8 common cultural principles that made them successful. And anyone can copy them to different extents. And I said, well, let's try to formulate this and put this onto the paper. And unfortunately for me, it was a labor of love. And I got to more than 200 pages of writing.
Nice. I bet there was more than 8 though, right? It must have been hard to narrow them down.
Yeah, always try to refine the information. The interesting part about the process was you should have seen my bedroom floor.
Oh man, full
of paperwork, things scattered everywhere, trying to put things in different piles. It was a chaos.
You look like an old school detective.
Exactly. And then you say, I remember something. Where is it?
Yeah, nice. Who's this for? Is this just for HR? Is it just businesses in general? Who did you aim this at?
Yeah, so this is probably for 3 groups, really. I would say one is for individuals who want to improve their culture themselves or learn something and try to become more innovative as individuals themselves. I think it's also for teams, so people who want to learn how to innovate together and have that as a foundation of what they do as a team. And then companies, and it's not about HR practitioners, it's about you can be a company of any shape, any size, any industry, and there's something in this book for you. And, I must say it's quite a practical book, so it's not too academic. It doesn't go into too much academic detail. But what it does is at the end of each chapter, it has these hints and tips and helpful reflections that really, I would say, are like a menu. So it's a menu of things you can choose to do if you want to do it. And you don't have to do everything. And that's the really nice thing, I think.
Yeah. Just out of interest, how do you describe culture? Because every time I speak to, every person I speak to has a different perspective of what is culture.
Yeah, this is $1 million question, I guess. For me, I first have to say that culture, of course, comes from a Latin word, which is cultus. And the root of that word means to care. So I always think of culture as how do we care about our people? How do we care about our community and so on and so forth? And what it is for me in the day to day is the way we do things around here. And then I add something extra at the end, which is when no one is looking. And I say that because you can't fake a culture, or you can't fake it and have it as sustainable. So you have to do things because you want to do them, because you believe in its value. And if you do that, then you have the sustainable culture. If you try to trick and you try to have things because it looks good or you think that's the right thing to do, inevitably you don't believe in them and you won't be successful.
Yeah. Is that one of the reasons why you started? Because the first principle is rethink your business model. Was there a reason that you put that first in the list?
I mean, probably yes, because I mean, the world is changing so much. You know, we're in the fourth industrial revolution. I don't need to tell you, but we're facing 5G, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, all of these exponential changes. They used to happen one thing at a time. Now they're all happening at the same time. So the pace of change is going to be frightening. It is frightening. Everything's changing. And what I see is companies can't stay the same. And that's one of the biggest traps that people fall into. And of course, the historical examples of Nokia and Blockbuster and Kodak are there. But there are other examples that, you know, are phoenixes from the ashes, like Lego, who nearly went bankrupt and now is a wonderful, wonderful business. I would love to work there. And, you know, they've only been successful because they've been able to rethink their business model, change what they're doing, and continue pushing those boundaries. And I started with it because we are in that fourth industrial revolution. It is a hard operating environment, and we need to be cognizant of that.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the tips that you share around rethinking your business model? Because that's quite a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one indeed. It's a big one. I mean, the key is really having a mindset where you are willing to change, willing to try new things, and willing to even cannibalize your existing business. And, you know, that's where Blockbuster went wrong. That's where Netflix went right. So you know that Netflix was a postal service, DVDs in the post, and they changed their business model to internet streaming. And of course, financially, that was a huge risk. Everybody could have been saying, this is no good. We're making lots of profit from DVDs. Why would you do this? Why would you eat your business? And that's what they had to do. But we don't necessarily have that mentality in the companies unless you create that mentality.
Culturally.
Culturally. So when you work on that, when you're aware of it every day, then you can start making those steps. And I think that's the first thing is we're here talking about culture. This is not something that's easy to change. It's something that requires a lot of time, dedication, effort, and consistency. So you need to continually focus on those things. So, for example, when you're having a meeting about your business, are you having a meeting only about how many customers you have today, or are you having a meeting about what it might look like in the future? And I think we spend so much of our time trying to keep the wheels in motion and keep the business running that we negate and often forget that there's a future strategy that we need to be working on. And, you know, even if we could dedicate 20% of our time to the future, that would be better than what happens in most companies.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned Lego because obviously they went from making Lego to producing movies, selling the license fee for licensing for their movies, right? To creating games. The list goes on.
Yeah,
they completely tore up their business model and reinvented themselves.
Definitely. And, you know, I've got the Lego sneakers as well. So they're into everything now.
I didn't even know that. They got Lego trainers.
I think the partnership with Adidas. So definitely something to look at.
Yeah, nice. It's pretty. Second one you talk about is create creativity with constraints. Why did you say with constraints? I thought that was interesting. You say create creativity with constraints.
Yeah, this is interesting one for me. And, you know, you've picked out the subtlety or the difference here in what most companies do. So, you know, the historical management practice would be let's throw lots of resource, lots of money, lots of time at innovation. And actually, what you get when you look at that is you often get suboptimal outcomes. So the most successful companies that I've researched have actually been doing the opposite, which is they've been putting in constraints, i.e. less money, less resources, and less time to their innovation efforts. And some of the, most wonderful ones have what I call pressure cookers in order to create innovative.
Is that because they have
things.
less budget, they have less time, etc.? So they're kind of forced to.
So some are forced because they have less of those resources, and some impose the constraints themselves.
Okay.
And the one that caught my attention was British Airways, or the IAG Airlines group.
Mm-hmm.
I was traveling during COVID through Heathrow and managed to go into the executive lounge there. And on the table was a QR code. And you would scan the QR code for the menu, and they would bring you your food, obviously in a very COVID secure and safe way. And I looked at the bottom of this QR code and I said, it says Hangar 51. What's this? So onto Google I went, had a look at Hangar 51. And basically, this is British Airways or IAG Group's pressure cooker. They have companies or idea hackathons that last a small number of weeks. They have a small amount of funding applied to them, and they try to create this minimum viable product and push it to the market. And then they can test it with their different airlines. And this is what they've done with this, relatively simple QR code. But they've had many other successes, of course, with, different pilots on luggage, different pilots on how to board the planes, all sorts of different innovative things. But it was interesting to me that they'd chosen to create this pressure cooker environment, small amount of money, small amount of time, despite the fact that they have a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of resources. And I saw the same happening in the pharma industry and the telecom industry. Companies there, Hubram, which is Deutsche Telekom, doing exactly the same thing. Small hackathons, very intense, few amount of people, few amount of money, going very, very hard on innovation. And you can compare and contrast that to Nokia, who was outspending Apple and Samsung and all the other phone companies by a factor of 10 on their research and development budget, and they still failed. And I think they had the mindset of, if we throw money at this problem, we're going to have the best product. And it wasn't necessarily the case. They had to have constraints.
Mm-hmm. How does this translate though into creating steps and processes in place that then shifts the culture? Yeah, who does this sit with? What should the process look like for each of these kind of principles that we're talking about?
Yeah, many of these things, and I think it's really important to say culture isn't an HR topic.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things is, if you're a chief executive or a leader of a business and you outsource culture to HR, that proves you don't understand the value of culture, and your cultural transformation is going to fail. So when I look at all of these principles, I always like to say anyone and everyone should be responsible for this. And of course, maybe in this case, you have an innovation team that's responsible for this. Maybe you have a customer or colleague experience team that's running these things. That can all work. There's no problem of exactly where this sits. The key is to say it doesn't only sit within HR.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? It's just why I asked you that question.
Yeah.
In the first place, I've seen so many companies go wrong when it becomes just a HR thing.
Yeah, exactly.
that gets pushed out. Given that this is part of your role at Santander, how do you make sure this is a business imperative and not just something that sits within HR?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because we have 5 behaviors in the bank, which we call our team's behaviors, because they're think customer, embrace change, act now, move together, and speak up. And the interesting thing about our culture and our behaviors is that they were created by the customers and the employees. So I didn't go to bed one night, wake up in the morning and say, look, here's our culture. Let's go with this. I was asking a series of questions. What does it feel like to work here? What do you want it to feel like? And therefore, what steps do we need to take in order to do that? And of course, thinking about the business strategy, the external environment, all sorts of different inputs. But the key was this was co-created. And I think, to your point, that's also helped us a lot in the rollout and the deployment, because then people understand this isn't a thing coming from HR. This is something I personally helped shape. Therefore, I personally want to live it. Or definitely I have that stronger level of buy-in. So whenever you can do that, I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, it can't feel like it's being done to me.
And that will be the worst.
Yeah, which is normally the way though, right? Unfortunately, you kind of want you get an email, some posters go up, there's an announcement, here's our principles, here's what we stand for, and it's like, oh, okay, great. it doesn't, and we wonder why people aren't bought in.
This is the blueprint to doing it wrong, as you say.
Yeah. One of the ones that I'm quite interested in is in the principles was the growth mindset piece. I was glad to see that in there. How do you foster a growth mindset? Can you help someone develop that? Such a fascinating topic.
Yeah, I definitely believe you can foster a growth mindset. And of course, you've read the book and know the study by Carol Dweck, who coined this phrase. But she says people could either have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And the growth mindset are the people that want to learn, want to try new things, want to develop, understand that things are changing. And those with a fixed mindset are people who want to keep things the same, like the status quo, don't want to take risks, are protecting their backs, and those kind of things. And of course, those two things are very, very distinct, different mindsets. And I think when I look at culture within a company, the most important thing for me that a company can do to help people on that journey of having a growth mindset is create an environment where there's psychological safety. And in the book, I go into a lot of detail on this because psychological safety, as you know, is absolutely critical. Seems like a hot topic nowadays with most leaders that I speak to. But when you have psychological safety, you have an environment where people can speak up, where they're not afraid to fail, where they do want to participate, where they do want to take risk. And all those things lead to good outcomes. So it leads to innovation, but it also leads to higher employee engagement, better satisfaction, so on and so forth, which are all good things to have. The question is, how do you create psychological safety in a company? And, I have, I think, 7 rules set out in the book, or 7 things you can do, but I'll mention a few of them. And the first would be celebrate courageous conversations. So have really brave conversations, celebrate those, highlight them, use role models. The second thing, for example, could be, leaders don't rush to give advice to people. So when people come to you with problems or challenges, let them solve it. Don't be so quick to say, I've got the answer, here it is. So those kind of things you can do. And as I say, I've highlighted 7 of them in the book. And the best example, perhaps, is from one TV show that I absolutely adore, which is New Amsterdam Hospital. I don't know if you've watched this one.
Yeah, Chris, I do know. Yeah.
So the first episode of the first series, I always tell everyone this will take you 30 minutes and you'll learn a lot about psychological safety. I also then say, if you watch the first episode, you're probably going to waste your next 20 hours doing a binge of all the series. But basically, this doctor, Max Goodwin, comes into New Amsterdam Hospital. This is a true story, by the way. He's a junior doctor who takes over one of America's largest public hospitals. And on the first day, he calls all of the employees into the auditorium. And he starts by saying that his sister was born and died at New Amsterdam Hospital. He also fires the cardiac department, so the people that do the operations on people's chests and hearts and so on. He sacks all of them. And he says, I'm firing you because you're interested in billing customers and making money. And the purpose of the hospital is actually to help sick people, not to make money. And then he asks, how can I help? And he lets employees say, I want more healthy food in the canteen. I want to remove the emergency waiting room. And he doesn't rush to give the advice. He lets them come up with the proposals and the ideas. And this is a masterclass in psychological safety because he has a courageous conversation. He's talking about his sister being born and dying in the hospital. He doesn't rush to give advice, as I said. He's letting the people come up with the ideas. And, he's created on the first day this environment where people can speak up, where they can be honest, where there can be no consequences. People are very clear. When he fires the cardiac department, he's removed all the ambiguity of what's the purpose of the hospital. He says the purpose is to help the customers, the patients, not to make money. So if you're in that environment and you're working there, you know what your job is now. Whereas before, you might have been thinking, should I make some money? Should I try to sell this drug? Now you know very clear. So that's a real masterclass. And, there's 2 real world examples about psychological safety that I love to use, both from the aviation industry. So SpaceX and Boeing. Of course, SpaceX, I'm a little bit of a geek, and I was in my office at home during COVID, February 2021, and I was watching the Falcon 9 rocket go up into the sky. There you are.
I watch all of them every time even now, every time they launch, I'm in. Got my notifications on YouTube.
Love it. Fantastic. So you know that they have the chief engineer doing the voiceover and explaining what's going
Yeah,
on.
he's
And,
so
you
good
know,
as well.
really good guy. I calculated this because they're a private company. I calculated the rocket's about $45 million, right?
Hmm.
Just on parts alone, not the labor costs and the IP and everything. Anyway, so they send the rocket up to sky, and it's coming down to land, and it explodes when it lands. And I thought, oh God, the chief engineer is going to be really upset. $45 million gone up in smoke. And he says, well, we've learned a lot. That was just a test flight. We'll try to do it better next time. We have some good data. And lo and behold, people must have been feeling pretty safe there, not being shouted at. Months later, they're putting more space junk and satellites every 3 months into space than the whole industry does in a year. So they learned and they grew and they were successful. Compare it to Boeing, that obviously had 2 fatal 737 MAX crashes.
Hmm.
Engineers at Boeing knew technical problems with the plane.
Just shifted the blame to the pilots.
Shifted the blame to the pilots. The people couldn't speak up. And the Congress in the US did a report that cited culture no less than 60 times as the factor that caused these crashes.
Yeah, I watched the documentary. It's very powerful.
Yeah, a few people have told me about that. Yeah. And, this is the key. The key is, what kind of company do you want? Do you want a company that learns and makes it safe as an environment to learn? Or do you want one that shuts you up and doesn't make it safe to escalate issues or doubts?
Yeah.
And I know where I want to work.
Yeah. One of the things that always I remember is when I was interviewing Simon Brown, Chief Learning Officer over at Novartis, and he says every year they had a award for like the best almost kind of, I can't remember the exact words he used, but it was just at the award ceremony, it was like an award for the biggest failure, but celebrating it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really cool thing every year to have an award for the nearly someone who's really striving and failing forward, and celebrating that as well. And I was like, oh, that's so cool that they have an award. Have an award.
That's really good. And I think you told me about his book actually. A while ago, and it's all about curiosity and trying new things, and that's a wonderful culture. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're not here to fail and do things bad on purpose.
No, of course.
But we're here to learn as we go along, and that's okay.
Yeah. What about what part does technology play in all this? We've seen technology has always played its part, but especially in the last 2 years, it's kind of exploded. Obviously, I'm sure the pandemic kind of slingshotted that forward 5 years as well. What's the role of technology in creating a culture?
Yeah, I think for me here, the key principle is to embrace technology rather than run away from it. And, everybody was scared when the internet first came out. Everyone said, this is going to take away the jobs. This is going to cause mass automation. McKinsey did a study, and they found for every 1 job that was destroyed, 2.6 jobs were created. They found that the GDP of the world increased 10% because of the internet. So the point is, the internet wasn't as bad as people thought. In my industry, when ATMs came out, everyone's used an ATM to take out cash from the hole in the wall. People were worried. They were nervous. They said, oh my God, the ATMs are going to close the branches. There's going to be no jobs anymore. Well, since they came out in the 1970s, populations increased 21%. The branches have increased 57%. It's because the technology made it lower cost to serve customers. Therefore, we could have more branches serving customers on more complex queries. So internet, ATMs, whatever technology you think of, you're typically scared at the start, but the outcome probably isn't so scary. And I think if we can have that mindset of embracing technology, using it to help us, that will be a good outcome. And, very specific to HR, because I know the listeners here are, predominantly from HR. If you look at learning and development as one, specific strand, Walmart, 2.3 million employees, biggest employer in the world behind the Chinese army, using virtual reality headsets to train their employees. They do it faster, cheaper, and the employees retain more information than ever before. So the question to me is, how can you use technology, not shall we run away from it and be scared of it? And when we go in with that mindset, I think we're going to have more chances to succeed.
Yeah. But how does it kind of help shape a culture of innovation, though? What are some examples?
Yeah. So I guess the point here is that the technology helps you innovate because you can use the technology to forward your advances. So, some of the things that I see very consistently are people using technology in order to reduce burden on other people, to free up their time. And that's one of the interesting things. So I was commenting about the internet and the ATMs. The key here is that instead of the cashiers in a bank branch counting money in and out, they don't have to do that anymore, which means they can spend their time getting to know the customers even better on a more deeper, granular level. And inherently that leads to innovation because they then know, the voice of the
Sure.
customer, what's going on, what are the needs. And it's the same if I think about recruitment. We always like to say, the war for talent, the market's really hot, it's difficult, and it is. But who are the ones that know the most? It's the recruiters. But did we ever ask the recruiters anything? No, because they're too busy phoning people every day.
Yeah.
So can we automate anything there for them? And if we can tap into their knowledge, because they're on the front line, that's probably going to help us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super interesting. What would you say, because there's so many stories in the book, what would you say is your favorite story in the book? It's quite a big one.
That's a big question, that one. Yeah, that's a really big question.
You spoke to so many great companies, organizations, leaders. What's the one that really stood out to you?
The interesting one that I found was Gary Ridge. I know
WD-40,
Gary,
such a good guy. He's finally retired. He's off.
I mean, he's off and he's on to the fun stuff now.
Yeah, happy retirement, Gary. If you ever listen to this,
I hope he does, and I'm sure he does actually, because as you say, a legend of the industry, and he gave me a piece of advice about leadership that really stayed with me. And by the way, WD-40 has done an amazing business, an amazing cultural transformation. But he said to me, as a leader, you have to understand that it's not about you. Your job is to help uplift others. And I think the reason that stayed with me is because I've seen many leaders thinking, okay, I've risen to a position of leadership. I've risen to a position where I have power and influence. What I'll do is I'll try to make myself look good now. And Gary's positioning was, that's not how you should behave. You should be trying to uplift your team and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I look at WD-40 as the case of that. He's uplifted his tribes, his people, and they've done great things. And, that can go, and I won't name companies, but that can go in stark contrast to companies where the leaders are always positioning themselves and trying to vie for more power and influence. So really great company, that one.
Yeah, and that shapes culture, right? If your culture is that you got to look out for Chris and always focus on making myself look good, that creates a very toxic culture. And it becomes very, very difficult to thrive in that environment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, one of the interesting things is I never tell anyone, do this or do that, or have a culture like this or like that. Because the reality is each company is different, and you can have subtleties and perhaps in some organizations, you want to have that competitive edge. Perhaps in others, you don't. That's not for me to say, and only the leaders and the founders or the CEOs can decide what do they think the culture should be and validate that with the employees. And as long as you do that, I'm more calm that if you do have that perhaps competitive edge, fine.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've done 600 episodes of this show, and every time I speak to CHROs and leaders, they always want to talk about culture. When I say to them, what's the top 3 things that are top of mind for you right now, and what you're most passionate about? Their culture. It's always there. But every single person I speak to has a different perspective and view of what that really means. I'm interested to know, because you've also spoke to so many individuals, what are some of the common mistakes that you see companies make when it comes to shaping or trying to put a pinpoint, this is what our culture is?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake is one that you mentioned right at the start, which is trying to impose a culture upon people. That doesn't work. You don't get the buy-in, and that's really not a good thing to do. And then probably the second most common mistake is a mistake or question that I get asked everywhere I go.
Okay, just a good way.
What happens when there's a leader who's not aligned to the culture? What happens when there's somebody who is fighting against the culture? And my answer on this is very clear. Yes, of course, you give them the chance to adapt and to change, but it is really, really difficult to change a human being's values and beliefs, to make them align to a company's values and beliefs if they're different. So the only thing you can do in that scenario, and it's the most humane thing to do, is exit them from the company.
For both sides, right? Because they're going to be miserable, you're going to be, it's going to work, and so it's bad for both parties.
And, the reality is most people don't want to hear that advice. Most people want to try to hide from that because it's a difficult conversation. It's a hard thing to do.
I've been there.
But you've said it, it's humane and nice or better for both sides. No one wants to come to work and not be happy.
No.
So why keep them in that environment?
Yeah. It's funny because I've seen, I've been part of companies before where they have those particular leaders. And I'll give you an example of one where one of the leaders was a very high revenue generator in the sales function, generating tens of millions, and just was not a culture fit. And they kind of was reshaping the company, but they just wouldn't let him go because he generated X revenue. And it kind of permeated throughout the business like a virus, to the point where everyone was so annoyed, and me included, that we were like, we're just not going to work with this individual. Like you can't say to us as a business that this is our culture. And then you have this individual operating in the company. So it's so important. It's so demotivating. Otherwise, it was very demotivating for the rest of us to work in that environment. So it isn't just that person's not going to be happy. It's just that you're sending a very clear message to the rest of the business if you don't make that decision.
Yeah, and this is the thing. We always say culture is what you can observe and see, and that's halfway there. But it's also the actions that you don't take. So when you're a leader, people are watching you.
Yes.
They watch you very closely, but they also observe what you do and don't do. So if you don't challenge people on certain behaviors, if you don't challenge people when they show a bad behavior or shout in a meeting, then that's also observed, and that becomes part of your culture in a negative way. So when you do have these fantastic revenue generators behaving as absolute jerks, that is observed. People don't forget, and they don't forgive. They know it, and that becomes the culture.
That's an important point. It works both ways. Good to have people that probably don't think about that. They're trying to focus on all of these things that are going to make a great culture, but are you actually looking out for those red flags that are also shaping it in the opposite direction?
Yeah, and this is why culture doesn't change because you put some words on a wall, obviously.
100%.
You have to really live it and breathe it day in, day out, everywhere you do, everything you do.
I suppose that's one of the reasons why you have then the 8th principle, which is leaders participate in culture.
Yeah, exactly.
For that exact reason, right?
Exactly, for that exact reason. I mean, we do need leaders to participate in culture. As we already said, this is not an HR topic. If you outsource culture, it means you don't believe in it or don't understand it, and therefore you won't get the value. And people do observe what you do and don't do. Yeah. So you have an outsized role as a leader to play because you are the role model and you need to lead by example. And, everybody can have a bad behavior on a specific day. The question is, were you aware of that? Were you mindful about that? And will you change it moving forwards to try to reduce those instances? Because I'm not saying we all have to be perfect all of the time, but we have to make sure that we're consistent with the culture.
Yeah. A random question just came to mind. I remember I can't remember who said it, the old culture eats strategy for breakfast. Who was it?
Yeah, the Peter Drucker quote.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. There you go. Do you agree with that?
I do, because actually I came from strategy before I joined HR.
Okay. Okay.
And, let me tell you, it's easy to change the price of a mortgage. I can go to an executive committee on a Thursday, change the price of a mortgage on a Friday, and already know the results because I've modeled it. But when you try to change culture, you're onto something much more difficult, much more lasting. And the reality is you can have a very good business strategy, but if you have the wrong people or the people executing poorly, it doesn't matter how good your strategy is.
Yeah.
But conversely, if you have really great people really bought into your company, you can have a perhaps more suboptimal strategy and still have a better outcome. So the culture is definitely the multiplier in this case.
100%. Well, look, I'm really excited to get the book into everyone's hands, but I want to leave by asking you this question. What's the one thing that you want readers to take away from the book? If you could just choose one thing that they took away, what would that be?
Well, the key thing for me is anybody can change the culture, and it doesn't need to be a big thing or a small thing. There's, all sorts of shapes and sizes of actions that you can do. So for me, it would be have a look through the book, choose one thing, and then just try to implement it for a week and see the difference. And, I'd be delighted if anyone did that.
Yeah. And you mentioned at the end of each chapter, you have practical
so either some
applications.
Applications or some questions for reflection, those kind of things. And
Always
as
good.
I say, it's just a menu. Just choose what you want to do. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to eat everything on the menu. Go for something. Anything is better than nothing.
Yeah, amazing. And the last question: where can people reach you if they want to if they want to reach out to you personally, connect with you, and also grab a copy of the book?
Yeah, I think, you can find The Culture Advantage on Amazon and all good bookstores. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm Dan Strode. Most people connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm fairly responsive through the flood of DMs there.
Nice.
And if you're really eager, you can go to danielstrode.com. And what I'll do is anyone who goes to danielstrode.com, if you sign up to the emailing there, I won't send you any email other than a free book chapter.
Nice.
Nothing else. And maybe that piques your interest.
Amazing. Well, look, firstly, congratulations. I remember when we first spoke about you writing the book, and you was going through, Chris, do you know any people who I could speak to? And
this is the thing. I mean, you helped me a lot with the book, Chris. So I'm really, really grateful to your support. I'm grateful for what you do in the industry and pushing these topics and agendas. And as I say, you helped me with the book. So I'm really proud to know you.
No worries. I'm super happy that you actually executed and made it happen. A lot of people talk about it, but we know how much work that goes into it. You made it happen. So congratulations. And look forward to speaking again soon. All the best.
Thank you. Pleasure's mine.